we're live at our Ohio Bible Institute podcast, and again, we have a special guest with us today, one of my friends and one of my bosses right now, Pastor Mitch from down in Chillicothe, Ohio. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, sir?
Man, I'm good. I wish you had a Georgia Bulldog sweatshirt on.
Well, I've done that.
You do that on purpose?
I did it on purpose. That's why I wore it.
Good. You know, everybody tells me, he says, you know, you live in Ohio, you should be a Buckeye fan. I say, okay. If you moved to Florida, would you become a Gator fan?
No.
See, that's what I tell people.
No way.
No way. So
No way.
it's like you stick with the team, you be faithful.
Stick with a winner.
That's right. You stick with a winner. Is that what it is? That's right. That's funny. I'm not a Cowboys fan.
Oh, okay.
I grew up and it was the Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and all them. That was cool.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I'm not a Cowboys fan. I'm just I may lose. You know, I may lose people for that.
You
one.
might. You might. They might bail.
But no, it's good to have you here, man. And so one of the things we do with podcasts is we first get real. I would like for you to share, as everybody has this point, how you came to know Christ. You know, somebody may be listening to this that's lost, and every story we've heard is different, but there's similarities in the message. So how did you come to know Jesus as your Savior?
Well, I grew up in church. As they always say, I attended Free Will Baptist Church before I was even born. My mom and dad, my dad was a deacon. My mom was a piano player at the first Free Will Baptist Church in Chillicothe. So I grew up in that church. And then what happened was I had a lot of Bible knowledge, and my wife and I were living in Oklahoma City, and I was not saved, but God was dealing with me. And at that time, I believe it might have been Desert Storm, perhaps. I knew what the Bible said about at the end of time, there was going to be wars and rumors of wars. And so conviction started setting in. We moved back to Chillicothe, Ohio. And when we moved back to Chillicothe, God was still dealing with me and drawing me. And I thought, well, if I just attend church, maybe he'll leave me alone. So I started attending a church, and I would go on Sunday morning just to worship. I did that for 9 months, and they had a homecoming. And Clifford Ball was preaching the homecoming, and after he got done preaching, I can't tell you what he preached, I can't tell you a word he said, but I knew that when he was done, and they give the altar call, I knew right then I either go to the altar and give my heart to the Lord, or he's going to quit dealing with me, and I'm done. And so my dad was right on the aisle, and I said, "Dad, would you let me out?" And he said, "I've never seen anybody shake as much as you were shaking." He said, "You had that pew. You
had the pew grip.
I had the pew grip. I was shaking," and he let me out, and I went up to the altar, and the rest is history.
Well, man, that's good. So how old were you when you got saved?
I was, let's see, that was in 1984, so I would have been 24.
Wow. So you're married. So
yes.
So you got saved at 24 back in Chillicothe. So you were in Oklahoma, and then you came back.
Yes.
So then you know, you started your life following Christ for real. You knew the knowledge and things. So what point led you to say, "Hey, man, I think the Lord wants me to be the guy behind the pulpit to start preaching"?
Well, I was at a men's retreat. That's when we was up in Shreve, and I went to the altar, had no idea why I was even going to the altar, but I knew God was calling me to the altar. And I went to the altar, prayed, and I said, "Lord, I'm not sure why you have me here, but whatever it is, just let me know." And I went home to my home church the next day, and from that point on, I knew exactly what the Lord wanted me to do. And that was to begin. I started out as a deacon, but then the Lord called me into the ministry, and I've been pastoring for 24 years, but I was actually called 26 years ago, and that's when they set me aside, and I went through the going out and preaching for 2 years. I didn't make the 2 years though. I made about a year and a half, and the church, First Free Will Baptist Church, needed a pastor. And I went down there and was helping them out. And then they asked me if I'd go ahead and become the pastor there. So I did not fulfill my 2 years, but they went ahead and ordained me and from Cornerstone Conference and allowed me to go ahead and start pastoring the church. So that's
good.
Yes.
You know, I don't know this is like a straight, you know, you got to do it this way answer, but I've often wondered if guys who've answered the call to preach, should serve as deacons first. And
It's a great work. I
because
can
the
think that.
deacons were chosen to serve the pastor,
That's
and
correct.
so the pastor could do his work. So what greater opportunity to see if a man really does love the office so much that he'll do whatever he can to make it successful.
That is correct.
Woo! And you just think through that. So that's probably had an impact on your ministry.
All tremendously,
Oh yeah.
tremendous impact. And I the only thing that, of course, you know as well as I do, Free Will Baptist, you don't have to have any kind of, you don't have to go to seminary or any of that.
Yeah.
But that was probably where I learned most of my pastorship stuff, is when I was the deacon, going to the hospitals, visiting people.
Mm-hmm.
That's what got
That's
me
where you
there.
learned to shepherd the flock.
It was. That's
Yeah.
where I learned how to do it.
Yeah.
And the other deacons that was there was older, and so they allowed me to do most about all of it. So I learned a lot from just being the deacon about.
That's what I'm
a
saying.
pastor
It's
does.
just there may be something, and we were actually doing a class in the OBI on deacons,
Yes.
and that may be something we question when we go through that, and as possibility of it being a stepping stone. Stephen and Philip both were
Deacons.
and then they went off into
Yes.
the ministry. So there's an idea there. I just got to think through it.
I think there's two revenues that we use. One is youth pastor,
Yeah,
and then a youth pastor a lot of times becomes the senior pastor,
sure.
and then the deacons a lot of times.
Well, that's right, because he's underneath the pastor working, and then they kind of get an idea of what the world's like shepherding people. And,
Correct.
so that's good. Man, that's good. So let's continue on. Now, one of the reasons we have you here is that there's a movement in the denomination of Free Will Baptist. This is in all denominations. So if people are watching that aren't in Free Will Baptist, it's fine, because there's this huge problem of a shortage of pastors, shortage of deacons, shortage of teachers, leaders, just shortage of people willing to serve. And you and I have talked privately in board meetings, and then some of the stuff that's going on, that the numbers are not good where they are right now.
No.
And if, in our state, if we don't do something in 5 years, we could be up to a 50% shortage unless something changes, just because of age. And guys that are wanting to retire can't, because, there's just nobody to take their place. And so there's a lot of discussion about that. But you actually found yourself in a unique situation that's become a topic, hot topic in our movement, with this idea of merging churches.
Correct.
And so your church is actually a successful merge. You're called United Church now. So kind of go through that story. Let's ask some questions, but really, where did it start? What started this process of you guys actually talking to some other churches, and then how all that came together? And then we'll just kind of discuss through that a little bit.
It actually had started. There was two churches in Chillicothe. One was the one where I pastored, which is the First Free Will Baptist Church, and then the other church was New Hope Free Will Baptist Church. And me and the pastor was really good friends, and his name was Wendell Combs. And so Wendell Combs and I, every once in a while, would get together. Wendell was getting older; he was in that class that you was talking about. The church was getting older, and there was a lot of the people had been dying off. Church kept getting smaller and smaller. And so him and I talked about perhaps merging the churches together.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, the church that he was pastoring was not too up with it.
Yeah.
And so we didn't pursue it very much.
And that's important too, because you can't just go into a situation like that and say,
No.
we're merging.
No, you cannot.
Because you look at the people that have invested their lives
Yes,
in that place, and now they're thinking, you're going to take this away.
absolutely.
And so it takes a lot of preparation work. So anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think we need to hit that.
That's what the groundwork was.
Yeah.
That's where it started. Well, then he retired, and another pastor, Dan Wittig, came on board, and him and I were good friends as well. And him and I kind of pursued it more than Wendell and I did, because Dan was he says, look, if we don't do this, one of these churches are going to close. It's just inevitable. It's going to close. So we really need to see what we can do to get this to happen. And so then what happened was Dan decided to resign the church, which was the New Hope Free Will Baptist Church. But before he did, he had asked the congregation, which was really small by this time, would you guys be interested in a merger? And they said, with First Free Will, and he said, yes. And they said, yeah, we would be interested if Mitch will come out and talk to us about it, and let's see the options. And so then I met with the church, and we talked about a merger. And then I had never said anything at all to our church, because I didn't want to say something and get it all stirred up, and then
Yeah.
it fall apart. So I went out to New Hope first and talked to all of them about it, sat down with them, explained everything, and they said, well, we'd be interested in merging if you would be the pastor of the two churches coming together.
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay. I said, well, when I left there, then I went back to the First Free Will Baptist Church, and then that's when I brought it to their attention. Hey,
So what's the time frame from the former pastor to Dan to the closing? You started the conversation to the time that they're interested. How long did that take?
I'm going to say 5 years.
5 years.
5 years.
Okay. And let me ask you another question. This is a hard one. So, how does pastors, how do they get to where, you recognize, as Pastor Dan said, this church is not going to make it if we don't do something drastic? It's an honest diagnosis.
Correct.
How do you get to that point?
I believe you just have to look at what's going on inside of the church. You have to look at what is our fruit, what are we doing,
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that we are doing? If we continue to do what we're doing right now, will this church survive? And if the question is no, then something has to change. And what's the old adage?
Definition of insanity?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
continuing to do the same things over,
With expecting different results.
it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
You said two things. You said, if there's no fruit being produced. I think a large church should ask that. If souls aren't being saved,
Correct.
something's wrong,
Yes.
right? One of the first classes we're doing in the OBI is actually, what is the gospel? It's not really technique. It is going through the scriptures and really understanding what Christ did for us and what's the message we're supposed to teach. And you may not know this, but we just learned recently that 94% of people have never shared their faith. That's dumbfounding
Yes,
to me.
it is.
That's almost psychotic.
Yes.
I don't understand how somebody they can know Christ and not tell somebody about it.
Yeah.
Start the conversation and see how it goes, but
At least start it.
they start it. I mean, I've told you guys, talking privately, but if in the state of Ohio there's 6,000 Free Will
Excuse me.
Baptists, and that includes kids, right? I get that. So let's say there's 3,000 adults. If we were 10% successful this year, that's 300 new families
Yes.
in our churches. And you take those 300 new families and you realize, hey, if they're giving tithes and offerings to support the ministry, we could, as the state of Ohio, support fully missionaries in Japan or France or wherever. And there's more to it, but I understand people don't see the benefits of doing what God told us to do. So
No.
as a pastor, you brought out and you said, man, you have to, number one, see that's got to be fruit. So if there's no fruit, there's a problem.
Correct.
And then the second thing you said was, you asked the question, okay, what's going on? Are we continuing the same thing, expecting different results? And that is a massive statement.
Yes. Well, and the other thing that I look at, that you have to look at, I believe, is the age group that's in the church. What's the average age? The New Hope Free Will Baptist Church at that time, which was 2 years ago, the average age would have been over 60.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no kids, none. Well, it don't take long to figure out, well, if something doesn't happen quick,
Mm-hmm.
all these are going to go on to heaven.
Yeah.
And there's not going to be anybody.
Yeah.
So there has to do something.
Yeah. Well, I met an older lady one time, and she's now in heaven, and she used to support the OBI $10 a month, and she sent a little bit of money every month, and she said, "Do you promise to do whatever it takes to make sure my grandchildren are in heaven?" And I said, "Absolutely. I'll do whatever I can, as humanly possible, with the Lord's help, through everything we're doing to reach the next generation. But I said, you can do some things now too." And she said, "What?" I said, "Allow it to happen." I said, there's going to be some discomfort. There's going to be things that we've never done it that way. But when we get to heaven, are we
Yes.
going to argue over songbook colors and shirt
Correct.
ties? We're not. We're going to
No.
be like, there he is.
Yes.
I mean,
Abs-
there he is.
absolutely.
It's the old, it was somebody said, what is the gospel? It's Paul arrives in heaven and Stephen says, you murdered me, but I'm glad you're here.
Absolutely.
It's like, it's one of those things.
Absolutely.
So this is huge, because so I would think that the first step needs to be, obviously the leadership needs to talk, but there needs to be an honest evaluation
That's correct.
of the church.
Yes.
Rayner put out the book, Autopsy of a Deceased Church. and then there's the Revives Church, I think, that they put out after that. But we have means in our denomination to evaluate.
Yeah.
D6 has one, and some others, to evaluate the health of the church. That doesn't mean your church is going to close. That doesn't mean that we're wanting to merge your church, but that means something's got to change.
What's the health?
Yeah.
I think what happens, Ben, to people is that they get into a rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just go to church, we'll do our thing, we'll go home.
Mm-hmm.
And as you and I both know, you get into a rhythm like that, if there's nothing else beyond that,
Yeah.
it's just basically tradition.
That's right.
You're just going for no reason at all but to just say, I was there.
Yeah, it's gotta get real.
People's got to get outside of that. I
Yeah.
mean, they've got to look and say, okay, I went to church on Sunday, but now it's Monday.
Yeah.
What do I do?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you start getting ready for Sunday again. You start going out. You start talking to people.
Yeah.
And you live the life that you should live Monday
Yeah.
through Friday and worship on
Mhm.
Sunday. But people just don't seem to understand that. They just keep coming Sunday, and then things begin to fall apart, and they just don't know why.
Yeah, and I think I think you handled this well. I think, obviously, I believe you prayed about it.
Yes.
But when you went and talked to them, it wasn't announced, like you said. We're not going to put this big announcement. We're going to do these things. You just allowed the Lord to work over time, and then the Lord put in there what needed to happen, and probably began to stir in their hearts. And so the idea came. You brought it back to your church. How did you present it to your church that this was going to happen?
I hate to. This is live. So
Yeah.
I don't.
No, it's not live. We can.
I felt like in order for us to do this,
Mhm.
I looked at the facilities myself, and I
Mhm.
thought, okay, which one of these facilities would best suit
Mhm.
moving forward? And the church that we was in, which was the First Free Will Baptist Church, we had a fellowship hall that was in the basement. No way to get to it other than stairs.
Mhm.
So a lot of our people who was older was not able to go down into the fellowship hall. So they would sit in the upstairs.
Mhm.
And so some of the people, if we tried to take them food, then some of the people said, well, you can't eat in the sanctuary. So there was a lot of people that was getting left out of fellowship dinners completely.
Mm.
So as a selling point, I almost say as a selling point, I told our people, I said, if you will just go out and look at the facilities, I said, those of you that's in wheelchairs that can't get in the basement, you don't have to worry about that anymore. This is all one floor plan. It's got a nice fellowship hall with it, and it's easy access in, easy access out. I said, the setup is just so much better than the one that we have where we're at now. Well, then they said, well, let's go look at it. I said, well, here's what we'll do. So I called the church, New Hope, and I said, hey, can we combine a service on a Sunday night
Mhm.
where all of our people can just come out and meet you guys? Because most of our people had never met them because we're in different conferences. So let our people meet your people, and then let's all walk through the buildings together and just let them see what you guys have
Mhm.
that we don't have,
Mhm.
and how much better it will make the facilities.
Yeah.
So that's where it all
All right.
started.
So, I mean, there's something coming up here. Maybe there's evaluate the fruit that's
Yes.
going on. Evaluate actually what are the practices, the traditions, and then you have to evaluate the facilities.
Correct.
Is this going to be able to happen?
Correct.
Because if both churches had a basement fellowship hall, we had to figure something out.
That's correct.
Because you want to have that community.
Yes.
And then you use that opportunity to create community in a non-stressful way. Hey, we're just going to go out and hang out with these fellow believers.
Yes.
And that opened the door. Do you think that helped?
I believe it helped tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't say, hey, we're going to close our church, we're going out there.
Yeah.
We didn't do that. And we did it with a meal. We had like a fellowship together.
Mm-hmm.
So not only did we go through the building, we had a worship service, smaller worship service. It was on Sunday night. And then we met each other. We talked to each other. Everybody walked through the building. And then we met in the fellowship hall and had finger foods. And
Well, there's something to be
fellowship
said about
more.
food and fellowship.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get
That's
to know
good.
each other better
Yeah.
that way than if you would in a sanctuary setting where you just let's go out and have a service with them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get to know people in a service.
Yeah.
Because as soon as, you know as well as I do, as soon as amen's over, people's going out the door.
Yeah.
This way, we had this fellowship, we had the service first, smaller one,
Mm-hmm.
and then walk through the buildings. We've seen it, and then had the fellowship after the finger foods, and it worked real well.
So there's two churches up north. I don't know if it's public yet, so I won't say their names, but they're talking about merging, and they have done the same thing. They started with a couple of meetings, but now they're meeting on Sunday nights, just to see how it's going to work, just to look at the facilities and stuff, and it looks like it's going to go forward, and I'm excited.
Yes.
So that's what you did. So that's good. So you prayed, you met, and it looked like the Lord opened the door. Then you brought your people over to fellowship, and then say, what point did you decide this is it? This is what we're going to do?
I felt like as soon as the fellowship was over that we needed to go ahead and merge.
Yeah. The people feel the same way?
You know what? We had a meeting afterwards. Of course, the ones with New Hope, they were in it. I mean, they wasn't going to have to leave. They was all in. It was getting our people to understand the significance of this and being able to get them to do it. And so on a Sunday morning, because we had at the church that I pastor, we have quite a few members, but there's a lot of non-members as well. So I had a vote, and I said, I need to know something. I don't care if you're a member or non-member. I want everybody at the meeting. And I want to know if we do this merger, if you're not a member, are you still going to go? Or are you going to say, no, we're not going?
That's huge.
You ain't kidding, because if you got, like our church that we have, probably out of our Sunday morning attendance, probably only half of them are actually members. So if only the members would have went and the non-members would not have went, we would have lost a big part of our congregation.
Well, you probably showed them fellowship and inclusion there too.
Yes.
I think that was important in that situation to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Because I told them, I said, look, you might not be a member, but you pay your tithes here. Your money is here. You're part of this. You need to be involved in this. This is not just for the membership to vote on this type of a setting, because it includes all of us. So I included the non-members as well.
I bet they appreciated that.
They seem like they
this
did.
This is a unique situation that we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about mergers, and we're also talking about having circuit preachers again.
Yes.
To travel to different churches, and that's a whole nother topic. But so we're trying things outside of the box, against tradition, because the church's health and the future of the church in that area depended on it. Because if you did nothing, what's going to happen to both churches?
Correct.
In 10 years?
Yeah.
That's awful.
And that's what I worry about circuit preaching or circuit preachers, is because if you got a church that's only got 5 members, they need preached to. I understand that.
Yeah.
But if that's all they're doing is coming to church to get preached to, and that circuit preacher is not going to get to know them real well. I mean, he'll get to know them pretty good, but not real well. What's going to happen to that church anyway?
Yeah. And that's part of the discussion we'll have to have. So this all comes back to, our wants versus the needs of the kingdom.
Correct.
Our will versus his will. And now let me just back it up. I think we need more churches. Inside a county, we just did a community report. There's like 24,000 people who don't go to church on Sunday morning. Every one of those people went to church Sunday, there wouldn't be room for them.
Correct.
Right? I think we need more churches. And so the idea of, quote unquote, closing a church still breaks my heart. Like, oh my goodness, we've lost a building in a specific location. But for the future of the church as a whole in that area, sometimes a merger is key. You've got to bring the church together, because now the result is y'all are stronger now.
Yes.
So explain now what's happened, what's going on at the church since then.
The first 2 years, we've just passed our first 2 years. The first 2 years was more or less just getting established. Of course, if you go to a church, a lot of times when you walk in, everybody has their own pew. So the first couple of months is basically really getting to know who's there, getting to know their names, getting to know who all is involved. And then after that takes place, then it's the legality parts of it, getting everything moved. The utilities has to be moved. Of course, we had to have a new name. Of course, we figured out what building we was going to worship in. That's the first one.
Yeah.
Second one is, okay, what are we going to do with the names? So then we had to figure out what the name of the church was going to be. That was the second thing that we dealt with. Once we got the name of the church, well, then all the bank accounts has to be changed. And then all the utilities has to be changed. And then the last thing, we had to incorporate the new church. And once you incorporate, then all the different parcels of land has to be put into that new corporation. So the first 2 years was probably just getting to know each other, getting the legalities all built, getting that foundation built, getting all the new billing addresses and all that taking place. But now that we're done with that, now we're moving into what is our next step. We've got the foundation laid. Now people are in the community are seeing more cars in the parking lot. So they're stopping me and saying, I see that the church is beginning to grow.
Yeah.
So there's an excitement now because now we're looking at, okay, now the foundation is laid.
What's going on?
What's going on? Now let's begin moving into the community and saturating it, trying to get people from the community to start coming to the church.
So how did you do this is a tough one. How did you do leadership transfer from one church to the other? How did you do teachers or workers? So I'm a deacon here or I'm a deacon here. And I was, how did you merge those?
Well, we had 2 different conferences. And so what had happened to the other church as they was declining, they had lost all their deacons. They'd passed away.
All right.
So then our deacons, when we started the United Free Will Baptist Church, our deacons automatically became the deacons of United. But they had to go because what I did as the pastor.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Since we went into the New Hope Free Will Baptist Church, I felt like we should go into their conference.
Yeah.
I just thought that was the right thing to do. And by doing that, then our deacons then had to become deacons in that conference. So they had to change their deaconship papers. And they had lost so many of their leaders that most of our leaders became the leaders of the United Free Will Baptist Church. And we didn't have a whole lot of issues with the leadership change.
That's good.
We gained more leaders than we lost because what they did have left really dovetailed good with what we lacked in the leadership side of ours. Yeah. So it was just a perfect fit.
So the Lord worked this out, and now the church is stronger than it has been in a while. So it's growing, and I've heard you talk about how good things are.
Yeah.
So let's get personal for just a minute. How did that affect you as a pastor? How did that? 2 years of tough transfer. We've been through that here. So how are you as a pastor now? It's energized you a little bit. It looks like.
It's really helped me more because when I was at the first church, because that's the only church I've ever pastored.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I had went as far as I could with the church. And so I was asking pastor friends of mine, how do you know when you've been at a church and you need to go? How does that feel? Well, everyone I talked to said, well, you'll know when it's that time, you'll know it's ready to go. I felt like that's where I was at with the first church. I felt like this is it. Matter of fact, I'd even told our church before the merger, I said, when I turn 62 on September 30th, I'm retiring.
Yeah.
And when we went to New Hope and I sat with them folks the first night, they said, oh, we heard that you're retiring at 62. I said, I am. And they said, well, what's that going to leave us? I said, well, you'll have to find a pastor. I said, I'll just get it merged. And I said, then, and they said, oh, okay, all right. Well, after the merge started, and we started going to that church where we're at now, it's almost like a new pastorship. It's almost like when you first get married, that excitement that is in that. It's like the honeymoon stage, and that's what I am still going through now is the honeymoon stage because it's all new. It's new people and just all kinds of stuff.
Well, the Lord was definitely working in your heart.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We're definitely working in your heart. So I think that, sometimes we have to use discernment in our prayer time, in our private time, and to say, Lord, what is it that you'd have me do? And to be honest, and I think you did right. I think you got counsel from other guys and began to pray, and it looked like, it's definite, the Lord's hands, and it was in this move. And I think that's key here when we talk about fruits, facilities, and all the mergers. God has to be in it. This is not the end all be all. This is not about you guys saying, well, let's merge together and see what happens. God has to be in the merge. Because if he's not, I think you're going to see some problems.
Big problems, I believe.
Yeah.
But with that happened, and by the way, I didn't retire.
No, I know. I know.
I'm already past the September 30th, and I'm already moving on. And
well, I'm glad you didn't retire.
Don't know when it's going to happen.
No, I know that. I'm glad you didn't retire, but I've also, talking to you, you've told me a few times that, you feel re-energized in
I
the
do.
pastorate,
Yeah.
and so that's good. So we're looking forward to what's going to happen in that church in the future. Now let me just say this: like, if there are pastors out there that are considering this, they can send us a note to questions@ohiofwb.org. Those are not done yet, but I just want to give them an opportunity to say, "Hey, I'd like to ask you this." They could. So if they send me
Absolutely.
that, I'll forward it to you
Sure.
and maybe connect, because they may have questions about what's going on, because you are a success story. There's guys in Nashville that know about your church and what's going on. So there may be some that hear this to say, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you about this."
Sure.
Because sometimes the leadership, we can say, "You guys need to do this," but really somebody's actually been through it. You can say, "Yeah, it was tough to do the bylaws. It was tough to figure out a name. It
Yes.
was tough to get the properties and all those things there." So let's talk about something else. How another, I just remember this, how God worked in this. When you left the other building, you wonder what was going to happen with it. And I think you were at a grocery store or something, and somebody came up and asked you about a building and renting, and
Yes.
you didn't know what was going on. So let's
Absolutely.
talk about that real quick.
We one night after church, after we decided to merge, I went to Kroger's, and I needed two things. I needed bananas and I needed yogurt. And in the Kroger's that I was in, they was on opposite ends of the store. So I walk into the front door, and as I was going to get bananas, there happened to be muffins sitting there. And so I sit there and thought, how to buy them? No, better not. Better. So I kind of went back and forth in my mind. Well, I stayed there long enough to forgot about the bananas. Went clear across the other side of the store, got my yogurt. As I started to go up to the cash register, I was like, I forgot my bananas. Go back to the produce section. And as I go to the bananas, I heard this voice, Pastor Mitch Salyers. So I turned around. It was a pastor friend of mine at another church
Yeah.
in town. And so we and him was talking. He said, "Oh, by the way, how's your church doing?" And I said, "Well, which one?" He said, "What do you mean, which one?" I said, "Well, my church on Watt Street, First Free Will and New Hope, we're going to merge." "Really?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, what are you going to do with your old church?" I said, "Well, right now we're just kind of kicking it around, but we're thinking about maybe a homeless shelter, or we don't know what we're going to do with it. Maybe rent it out for weddings." I said, "Because we got to pay utilities, we got to keep it going." And he said, "You're not going to believe this." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And his name's Jeff Blakeman. He said, "I don't ever come in here." And I said, "Really?" He says, "No." He says, "I don't like this one." He says, "I always go to the Kroger's on Bridge Street."
Yeah.
But it was Christmas time. And he said, in Chillicothe, as you're coming down the main street up on the hill, there's a big star. So he told his wife, he said, "Hey, let's go down and look at the star tonight." She said, "Oh, yeah, let's do that." So he said, as we're coming down Main Street, we remembered we had to get some stuff for Kroger's. He says, "Man, we're just so close to Western Avenue Kroger's. Let's just go there." She said, "Well, that's fine. We just need a couple of things." And he says, "Wouldn't you know, the same time that you're here, I'm here. And I'm looking for a church on the east end of town. I've been looking for years, can't find them.
Mm-hmm.
And here you are tonight telling me that you got a church that you would possibly rent to us."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Oh, absolutely."
Yeah.
He said, "I think this is a God thing." I said, "There's no doubt this is a God thing. 'Cause
Yeah.
I shouldn't even be in the produce aisle.
Yeah.
I should have been gone,
Mm-hmm.
got my yogurt and in my car and gone." But
Yeah.
I said, "But I stayed too long at the muffin aisle." I said, "I was contemplating them, walked away from them." I said, "I should not even have been here anyway,
Yeah.
Jeff." So that's where it started. And so me and him got together, and he said, "Well, how much would you charge to rent it?" I said, "Luke, all I want," I said, "if it's a church going into a church," and I knew it. He's a
Yeah.
Bible Baptist.
Yeah.
It's a Bible preaching Bible. I said,
Yeah.
"Look, if you'll pay the utilities, I'll rent the building to you for just our utilities, so we don't have to pay utilities."
Yeah.
And he said, "We'll do that." I
That's
said,
good.
"Fantastic." So I'm going to go on a little bit farther.
Yeah.
A year into it, the church decided they wanted to buy the building.
Yeah.
And I said, "Okay." So we was going to get a land lease, land
Mhm.
contract. We was going to sell him the building, the whole thing. We were supposed to meet on a Thursday, him and I was.
Yeah.
On Tuesday, he called me. And he said, "Mitch," he says, "we need to talk." I said, "What's going on?" He said, "We need to talk." I said, "All right." So I met him at his house. He was all distraught. And I said, "Jeff, what's wrong, buddy?" He said, "You ain't going to believe this." I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Do you know where the church is over the hill, Liberty Baptist?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "They called me. They want to merge."
Yeah.
I said, "Okay." He said, I feel bad. And I said, what do you feel bad for? He said, well, they want to merge with me and y'all want to be the pastor. I said, well, why do you feel bad for? Why? He said, what are we going to do about your building? I said, I ain't going to worry about it.
Yeah.
He said, well, by the way, there's another pastor that I know, and he's looking for a church.
Mm-hmm.
And his name's Don Hutton. Well, I knew Don Hutton. He's a painting contractor.
Yeah.
Don's a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
And I said, well, if Don needs a church, have him call me. So the next day, Don calls. He says, Mitch, I heard you got a church for sale. I said, yeah. He said, well, can I have the same deal that Jeff had? I said, well, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're still renting it to a Bible.
Well, that's good. And so you've had 2 mergers come out of that church, and you rent it to another church?
Yes.
So.
And both of those churches, is just, both of them are just, one of them is a Church of God and the other one is a Bible Baptist. And they're both looking for churches. And so God just kind of, like a chessboard, God just kind of moved them around.
Isn't that awesome how he
It
does
is.
that,
It's
man?
fantastic.
That's good.
And Jeff and their church is doing good, and the one that's in our church is doing good. And
it's almost like when you do what the Lord wants you to do, he adds to his church.
Yeah.
And I've read that somewhere.
Yes,
It's like,
absolutely.
So that's good. So
Yeah.
all right, so let me turn the dial just a little bit, because you've brought some things up, and I know some things about you. But even though you had this building, you thought, okay, how can we use this to reach the community? You said a homeless shelter. You had given some other ideas. But I know that you work at a funeral home.
I do.
Do you still drive school buses?
Yep.
You drive school buses.
Yep.
So you're not just a pastor that's merged churches. You are involved in the community.
Correct.
So talk about your heart for the community of Chillicothe. Why are you so involved in the community like that?
Well, I was raised there, for one.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're raised in a community, it kind of gives you roots into the community. But I also know what the community is needing, some of the things that's going on there, because I've been there for so long. And being a bus driver, you really see the other side of how people really are living. And so it really helps you to understand what the needs really are that's out there.
Yeah.
And so and you can really meet those needs, perhaps, just by being in the community, like I am, working and coming in contact with people, coming in contact with families, and those kinds of things. And matter of fact, Ben, I get a lot of people don't even go to our church, has no affiliation. Call me and say, hey, Mitch, can you do a funeral for our family?
Yeah.
I don't know how many of those I've done, just because they're either connected to the bus, where I've dealt with them that way.
Yeah.
Or even howlers will have families that'll come and say, hey, we just don't have a pastor.
Yeah.
We don't have a preacher. Who you get? And howler says, oh, we got one on staff.
Yeah.
And so they say, oh, okay. So then I get to connect with that as well. So
I used to do
great
that.
Blessing.
Yeah, I tell pastors all the time, if they need to find a second job, working in funeral homes is a huge ministry.
You're not kidding. It's fantastic.
I get to meet a lot of people in their darkest times and share with them Christ and preach messages to people that would never come to my church.
Yeah.
I know my pastor does that. He fills in to funeral homes and things. But so you've got a community involvement. You've got a church that's becoming more healthy. You're strengthening. You've got excitement. There's been other churches started in your community and other mergers, and so it seems that God's really working in the community there. So let's talk to you as a pastor. So there's some people listening. I'm listening, and let's say that I'm the guy that's like, man, I'm just done with ministry. I'm tired. I don't know what God's doing. I don't know what my plan is. I don't know what His plans are for me. Okay, Pastor Mitch, talk to these guys. Pastor them for just a second. What do you say to them?
Well, the first thing I believe you really do some soul searching to find out exactly what God wants you to do. Working with people, and I'll just be honest with you, gets tough sometimes, and it gets really hard to go through some things. One of my pastor friends said, when it going really gets tough, that's when you have to dig in deep. And I think as men of God and as pastors really think about walking away, I think you have to spend a little bit more time in the Word, reading it, and spending more time with God, and just seeing exactly where He wants you to go and what He wants you to do. Because I was really ready to retire and walk away. And God just opened a lot of doors that keeps me going.
Yeah.
And he does that on a daily basis a lot of times.
Well, it's Second Timothy. You know this, and Paul's writing to Timothy, and he says, Timothy, I want you to know I've been to court, and the entire Roman government's down on me, and they're going to kill me. And this has been summarized version, okay? And he said, in that moment, no one stood with me, but the Lord stood with me.
Absolutely.
But why did the Lord stand with him in those times? So that the gospel would be preached.
Yes.
The preacher is important.
Yes.
And God himself says, I'm going to take care of you. So you are there for a reason to minister in the area you're in. And even though you feel like you're alone, you're not.
You're not. No.
The Lord's with you.
Yes.
And like you said, when you pause for a little bit and just back up and say, Lord, what is it you want me to do? He'll start showing you these things.
Yeah.
And then I think it comes back to the word you said is honesty. We need to take an honest look at what's going on. And I don't consider you a bulldog, like out front punching people in the face to make them do what you want them to do kind of guy. But you did take a leadership role, and you almost kind of, Ron Hunter calls it the slinky dog. You kind of pulled the spring and let it catch up. You were going this way, and it was evident that this was going to happen, and you had steps in place that I think the Lord gave you wisdom for. But as a pastor, there's a responsibility after the honesty, but also to lead the change that needs to take place. Because if you didn't, where would we be right now?
Oh, yeah. There's still been 2 churches.
Yeah, maybe.
It might have only been 1.
Yeah. So I appreciate you being here. This has been fun, man.
Yeah, it has been.
And I pray that, as we prayed before, I pray that if there's some guys out there that are discouraged or churches that are just thinking maybe this will work or not, they'll hear that it can be successful if it's done right.
Yes.
So remember the few things at the OBI, you may not have heard this yet, but the Ohio Bible Institute, we're asking 2 questions. One is, what does the Bible say? And 2, will I obey? And so we want to know what God's doing in his word and in what we're doing in response to that word. What is he teaching us? And then how are we going to live that way according to his word? And then if you've got questions, I would challenge you to send questions to questions@ohiofwb.org. If you've got questions for Pastor Mitch and say, hey, I'm more interested in what's going on at your church and then, how the merger happened and maybe get some advice, send us a note to questions@ohiofwb.org. And we will forward that on to Pastor Mitch. And then I challenge everybody to continue to pray. I mean, 2 years, you're finally getting through all the paperwork and everything, and you're beginning your journey. But we want this church to continue on 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road where both of us will be in heaven.
Yes.
And so we want that to continue on if the Lord tarries. So pray that the Lord will begin to prepare whoever the next guy is for this church. Because Chillicothe is a great town.
Yes.
People ask about it all the time. They say, well, how do you know it's a good town? Well, you look at the restaurants. You got some good restaurants down there.
Restaurant Road.
That's right. But there's money there.
Yes, there is.
I mean, there's steakhouses and these buffets, and it's just food everywhere. So there's money there. Plus you have Royal King.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, buddy, that's a store. If you've never been to Royal King, that's worth moving there.
Big
so
draw.
yeah. So but really, it's a good thriving community.
Yes, it is.
And there's a lot. You got a great VA there.
Yes.
So there's some things that are in this community where a guy could minister, and so we're praying for you. And then we're also praying for the continuation of the church as we continue on through the years. And thank you for your willingness to serve and what you do for Ohio. And guys, again, if you got any questions, just reach out to us and we'll get it to him. And we will see you on the next podcast.
Amen.